I'm Dr. Khushbu Saxena, and it is my honor to be the host of this webinar. I welcome each and every one of you on behalf of Sri Balaji Action Medical Institute. I hope you enjoy this evening and take home precious pearls of knowledge from this talk. Type 2 diabetes mellitus was typically a disease of the elderly, but recently it is being seen more commonly in younger adults, increasing the burden of the disease. Diabetic kidney disease is the leading cause of chronic kidney disease worldwide, affecting approximately 40% of patients with diabetes. Patients with diabetic kidney disease require multiple OHAs and insulin for sugar control, multiple antihypertensive drugs to reach BP goal, lipid-lowering drugs, and antiplatelets for cardiovascular protection. There is a changing paradigm in the management of diabetic kidney disease with emergence of newer treatment options. Therefore, the talk today, titled Good News in the Management of Diabetic Kidney Disease, is the need of the hour. As is our tradition, we will light a lamp as tribute to Mother Saraswati before moving ahead. I request all of you to join me in the ceremony.
Asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya.
Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce the chairpersons for the evening. Dr. Sudhir Sehra sir is a specialist in internal medicine with a keen interest in diabetes and its various complications. He has a vast experience of over 30 years in his field. Currently, he is the head of Department of at the Department of Medicine at Sri Balaji Action Medical Institute. I welcome you, sir. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Arvind Agarwal sir, Senior Consultant, Department of Medicine at Sri Balaji Action Medical Institute. He is known for his exceptional knowledge and excellent patient care. Not only is he a good clinician, his work in academics is also noteworthy. I welcome you, sir. Lastly, I would like to welcome Dr. Saket Khan sir, Consultant Endocrinologist at Sri Balaji Action Medical Institute. He has completed his DM in Endocrinology from BHU Varanasi. He has qualified his MRCP, Specialty Certificate Examination in Diabetes and Endocrinology. He has been invited as a speaker, panelist, and chairperson in several conferences. I welcome you, sir. With this, I would request the chairpersons to take over this talk.
The very good thing is that Dr. Manisha Roda has also joined.
Oh,
so,
welcome. Welcome, Manisha. Welcome, Manisha.
Welcome, Dr. Manisha ma'am, also a senior consultant working in the Department of Medicine at Sri Balaji Action Medical Institute. Her experience is vast as her knowledge, and she is a provider of excellent patient care. I welcome you, ma'am.
Welcome, friends. I am Dr. Sehra, and it's my proud privilege to chair the session with the topic of good news in management of diabetic kidney disease, none other by my own batchmate and class fellow, Dr. Rajesh Agarwal, who after completion of his MD did his DNB from nephrology from AIMS, and he has also done his MRCP in specialty certificate examination in nephrology. He is heading the department of nephrology and doing a tremendous job. You have to come and see his department to believe what kind of work he does. And he is a clinician par excellence, as most of us are, and he is an avid reader and a good teacher. He has a number of publications to his name, and the current number of publications in the API textbook of medicine, and hopefully the topic he's going to talk today is also published in the coming API book of medicine. So With that, I think we all would be wiser after his talk, because we all are clinicians and treating diabetes. As a primary care physician or as a diabetologist, our aim is to provide the best possible care to our diabetic patients so that they do not land up in this nephropathy, or they do not land in the end stage renal disease and are subjected to hemodialysis, nor they should go in any cardiological problem, because this renal and cardiology problems are interlinked. It's a continuous process, and he'll be going to telling us about how to prevent diabetic kidney disease, and if somebody has it, how to treat that. Over to you, Dr. Rajesh.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. And I'm humbled by the introduction that you have given. And now, without wasting time, I would like to move further. I would like to today talk about recent advances in the management of diabetic kidney disease. According to IDF, in 2013, there were around 385 million patients of diabetes, and they are likely to grow to 592 million by the year 2035. That is 60 crore people developing diabetes in a population of 600 crores. So 10% of the world population is going to become diabetic by the year 2035. What is peculiar to India is younger people developing diabetes, that is from age of 20 to 45 years of age group. And it is a well-known fact, early the onset of diabetes, more complications, more cardiovascular disease, more kidney disease. About chronic kidney disease occurs in about 40% of the diabetics and is the leading cause of end-stage kidney disease in the world, accounting for about 50% of all ESKD patients. I have about 400 patients with end-stage kidney disease with me on dialysis. More than 50% of them, they are diabetics. Before I move further, I would like to clarify certain very commonly used terms. Diabetic kidney disease. What is diabetic kidney disease? It is a clinical diagnosis. Any chronic kidney disease in a patient of diabetes is called as diabetic kidney disease. It can be diabetic nephropathy. It may not be diabetic nephropathy. So when the GFR is less than 60 ml per minute, it may be associated with albuminuria, that is more than 30 milligram of albumin in 24 hours, or if the GFR is more than 60 ml per minute and the albuminuria is more than 30 milligram in 24 hours, we say this is diabetic kidney disease. Diabetic nephropathy is a pathological phenotype in which there is thickening of the basal membrane, mesangial expansion is there, and the podocyte loss is there. It is a pathological phenotype. Any chronic kidney disease which occurs in non-diabetics can occur in diabetics also. So there could be a primary glomerular disease, like the patient has got IgA nephropathy or infection associated
सर सॉरी
glomerulitis.
आई एम इंटरप्टिंग यू सर, एक
Yes,
बार
sir.
आप स्क्रीन शेयर भी ऑन कर लें सर, जिससे कि स्लाइड्स भी लोगों को दिख सके सर. मेरे ख्याल स्क्रीन शेयर ऑन नहीं हुआ है.
स्लाइड शेयर नहीं हो रही. स्लाइड दीजिए. हाँ, प्लीज.
Sorry to interrupt everybody, sir. Just sometime technical glitches comes.
Nothing wrong. Our generation is technologically challenged too, and we need assistance of our juniors regarding this.
No, sir. Generation is, sir, always follows the seniors. Yeah, fantastic, sir.
Yeah. Now it is on.
Yeah, we can carry on, sir.
Now it's okay?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, thank you. So any chronic kidney disease which occurs in a patient of diabetes can occur in non-diabetics, like hypertensive nephrosclerosis, ischemic nephropathy, or primary glomerular disease, which occurs in non-diabetics, can occur in diabetics as well. And what is peculiar to diabetes is diabetic nephropathy. And that can be associated with non-diabetic kidney disease, or it can be independent also. Normally, we think a diabetic patient will first develop microalbuminuria, then will develop macroalbuminuria, then will face fall in GFR, but this does not occur in about 20 to 50% of the diabetic patients when the GFR is less than 60 ml per minute. So whenever we screen diabetic patients for kidney disease, we should get not only urine albumin creatinine ratio, but also serum creatinine to see for the creatinine clearance. Now this is CAG classification, where we find when the GFR is less than 15 ml per minute, we say this is kidney failure and patient requires dialysis and kidney transplant. If the patient's GFR is between 15 and 30 ml per minute, we say this is stage 3 and it is red in color. Red in color means that it is high risk. And what is the risk? Risk is that it is likely to go to stage 5, that is the stage of dialysis and kidney transplant. That is one risk. And the second risk is that the patient can die of a cardiovascular cause. Going to be a cardiovascular mortality is very, very high. And this risk is the same when the GFR is between 45 to 59 ml per minute, but the albuminuria is more than 300 milligrams in 24 hours. So if albuminuria is more, then the risk of dying of a cardiovascular disease is more, and progression of kidney disease is also more. You can just see over here that if the albuminuria is say A1, less than 30 milligram, if the risk of dying is 1, it increases to 3 when the albuminuria is more than 300 milligram. And as the GFR falls less than 60 ml, then even if the albuminuria is A1, the risk of getting the cardiovascular disease and death increases. And at the age when the GFR is 30 ml per minute, then it is very, very high, even if the albuminuria is not there. So two things occur simultaneously. One is the GFR is falling. Second thing is that cardiovascular disease and mortality is coming in. Now, this is a very important slide. UKpedia study, all of us know that when a diabetic patient is not having any kidney disease, then the mortality is 1.4% every year. And if about 2% patients, they develop microalbuminuria every year. And when the microalbuminuria comes in, the mortality increases to 3%. That is, it becomes double as compared to when the microalbuminuria is not there. And 2.8% patients from microalbuminuria becomes macroalbuminuric. And then the mortality increases to 4.6%. That is 3 times the mortality when the kidney disease is not there. And 2.3% patients when macroalbuminuria, they start having higher creatinine. And now the mortality increases to 19.2%. That is, a patient with a higher creatinine, the chances of dying every year is around 19.2%. So there are two things occurring in a diabetic patient. One thing is he's developing a kidney disease from microalbuminuria to macroalbuminuria to elevated creatinine. And second thing is that he is dying. He is dying of cardiovascular cause and the cardiovascular disease from 1.4% to 19.2%. So whenever we plan treatment of diabetes kidney disease, two things are to be taken care of. One thing is that it should decrease the progression of kidney disease. Second thing is it should decrease cardiovascular morbidity and mortality and all-cause mortality. Now, if we take 100 patients of diabetic kidney disease and follow these patients up, only 10% of these patients, they progress to end-stage kidney disease. That is, they require dialysis and kidney transplants. And 90% of these patients, they die before they reach the stage of end-stage kidney disease. And how do they die? 50% they die of cardiovascular disease, and 25% they die of infections. Which infections? We know the COVID infections killed many diabetic patients. And similarly, other infections can occur and other causes could be there. For every one patient of end-stage kidney disease, there are about 200 patients of CKD stage 3. So whenever we plan patient care of diabetic kidney disease patients, the comprehensive care has to be taken care of. And we should always take care of the cardiovascular cause also. We had till now three pillars of management of diabetes kidney disease from the last 20 years. That is the glycemic control, the blood pressure control, and ARB ACE inhibitors. They were there in the last 20 years. Now, the recent landmark trials, fourth pillar added to the treatment of patients with GFR more than 25 ml per minute, that is SGLT2 inhibitors. It decreases the progression of eGFR by 40 to 50%, and albuminuria decreases by around 40%. It decreases cardiovascular morbidity and mortality and all-cause mortality. KDIGO, Kidney Disease Improving Global Outcome, is a very important organization which comes out with the guidelines, and the latest guidelines have come out in November 2020, and they have given recommendation of 1A to SGLT2 inhibitors for use in diabetic kidney disease when the GFR is more than 25 ml per minute. What is 1A? 1A means it is a recommendation and not a suggestion. And A means that 5 trials have been done with SGLT2 inhibitors. 6th is ongoing trial. And the results of all the 5 trials are just the same. That if you use practically this drug, you will definitely get the same results. ARB ACE inhibitors at 1B recommendation, but SGLT2 inhibitors is 1A recommendation. Now, this is a very, very important study. I can just tell you that if you take a patient who is 63 years old and he has got a GFR of 56 ml and has got albuminuria more than 300 milligram, and you just give glycemic control, blood pressure control, and ARB ACE inhibitors. By doing this, the rate of fall of GFR is around 4.59 ml per year. And in 10 years' time, he will reach the stage of stage 5, that is end stage renal disease, in 10 years' time. And moreover, I've told you, only 10% patients, they reach the stage of end stage renal disease. 90% is going to die of a cardiovascular cause and other cause, but 90% is going to die. Only 10% is going to remain at this year. Now, if you give SGLT2 inhibitor to this patient over and above ARB ACE inhibitors, then the rate of fall of GFR will come down to 1.85 ml per year. And then it will take another 15 years to reach the stage of end-stage renal disease. So 25 years from now, that is 63 years, he'll become 88 years when he will go to the stage of end-stage renal disease. So we have done our job. He has lived his life. And not only that, earlier only 10% patients, they were getting to the stage of end-stage renal disease. Now, I told you it decreases morbidity and mortality. More and more number of patients, they are coming to the stage of end-stage renal disease. So this is what the good news I'm going to talk. And I'll be talking in detail about this drug. Not only this, we have got other 2 drugs also coming in. Finerenone. This is mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. And this has also shown very good results. The results have recently come in. And then we have got GLP-1 receptor agonist. Very good results are coming in with the decreasing the cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. So we had only one drug in the last 20 years, that is Thermine. And now we are going to have Feast with SGLT2 already being adopted. And 5th and 6th pillar, they can be added by adding Finerenone and GLP-1 receptor agonist. Now I would like to tell you about the glycemic control. HbA1c remains the standard of care for long-term glycemic control. Monitoring despite its limitation of underestimating, that is very common, and overestimating, less common in advanced CKD when GFR is less than 30 ml per minute. When the GFR is less than 30 ml per minute and HbA1c is not concurrent with real-time blood sugar levels, then continuous glucose monitoring can be done and estimated HbA1c can be calculated. Method of HbA1c is more standardized cost effective, prognostically related, so it is preferred over the other methods of glycemic control measurements like glycated albumin and fructosamine. Now, what should be the glycemic targets? This should be individualized. According to the KDIGO, if the patient has got a GFR more than 90 ml per minute, he is not having any macrovascular complication. Macrovascular means no CVA, no cardiovascular disease, no peripheral disease. He is not having any comorbidities. The life expectancy is long. Hypoglycemic chances of hypoglycemia are less because his blood sugar is controlled either with exercise or with glyphosate. Then we should keep it less than 6.5. Whereas if the patient has got GFR less than 60 ml per minute, has got comorbidities, macrovascular complications like chronic kidney disease or the cardiovascular disease, or CVA, or peripheral disease, and the life expectancy is shorter, and the blood sugar is controlled with drugs which cause hypoglycemia, like glimepiride or insulin or rapidolite, then we should keep it more than 7 and less than 8. Two landmark trials, DCCT and UKPDS, all of us know. DCCT in type 1 and UKPDS in type 2. DCCT has clearly shown that if we keep it 7 HbA1c, then the microvascular complications, they decrease about 50 to 60%. And recently the data has come in that 40% lower risk of even end-stage kidney disease is also there in these patients if you keep HbA1c around 7. And in type 2 diabetes, if you keep it around 7% versus 7.9, then there is 25% decrease in microvascular complications and 20% decrease in end-stage kidney disease and death due to renal cause. Not only this, what they found after several years in UKPDS, type 2 diabetic patients, there was 18% decrease in myocardial infarction. Till now, we were thinking the glycemic control decreases microvascular complications, but it also decreases macrovascular complications also. So we should take care and keep the individualized glycemic targets as recommended. Now, what are the concerns of anti-hyperglycemic therapies in patients with diabetes and CKD? There is increased risk of hypoglycemia due to reduced clearance of sulfonylureas when GFR is less than 60 ml per minute. Like glimepiride, we should not give when the GFR is less than 60 ml per minute. Reduced glycemic efficacy of SGLT2 inhibitors when GFR is less than 45 ml per minute. So whenever the GFR is less than 45 ml per minute, the anti-hyperglycemic effect of SGLT2 is very moderate. And as the GFR decreases, the anti-hyperglycemic effect of SGLT2 becomes very, very minimal. But the organ protecting effect continues even when the GFR is around 15 ml per minute or when the patient goes, before the patient goes to dialysis. We cannot start SGLT2 inhibitors when the GFR is less than 25 ml per minute. But if you are giving it, go on giving this drug when the GFR falls, when the patient goes to dialysis, because it has been found that organ protecting effect of protecting heart, protecting kidneys continues even when the GFR, when the patient goes to dialysis. That's a very, very important thing. Increased toxicity of certain metmorphine when GFR is less than 30 ml per minute. So less than 30 ml, we avoid metmorphine because it can cause lactic acidosis. KDIGO has come out with very important guidelines. They say if the GFR in a diabetic kidney disease patient, when the GFR is more than 30 ml per minute, then we should control lifestyle changes about the diet, about the exercise, stopping smoking and alcohol. I will not be able to go in detail in this because of the scarcity of time. Then always start with metmorphine if you can give it. And SGLT2 inhibitors should always be added until unless contraindicated. SGLT2 inhibitors, even if HbA1c at level, blood sugar is controlled, then even we should give SGLT2 inhibitors to protect the organs. If the patient is taking such drugs like insulin or the gliclazide, where it can cause hypoglycemia, you can decrease the dose of certain drugs, but you should always give SGLT2 inhibitors. Now, what happens if you're giving metformin to the patient, you're giving SGLT2 inhibitors to the patient beyond 30 ml, and less than 30 ml, you cannot give metformin to the patient, then which drug should be given to control glycemia? What are we doing today? We are adding DPP4, excellent drugs. Like we give linagliptin, we can give even in dialysis patients, in end-stage renal disease patients, low risk of hypoglycemia, blood sugar control is very good. But the problem with this drug, it is an oral drug, cost-effective drug. The problem is it is not an organ-protecting drug. We have to prefer drugs which decrease mortality. SGLT decreases cardiovascular and renal mortality. And we have to have a drug which controls blood sugar, not only controls blood sugar, but also cardiovascular mortality. Now we use insulin, we use gliclazide, we use ripetylite. All these drugs are very good anti-hyperglycemic agents. There is risk of hypoglycemia, but they are not organ-protecting drugs. GLP-1 receptor agonist is the preferred next drug to control the glycemia. It decreases atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular mortality, decreases albuminuria, and possibly decrease the rate of fall of GFR. It can be used up to 15 ml of GFR and then this patient is not on dialysis. This is what the recommendation of KDIGO is. So the next line should be GLP-1 receptor agonist. We know the problems of GLP-1 receptor agonist. It is a costly drug. It is an injection. It can cause anorexia, weight loss, but I don't have much experience of using these drugs. We have got very learned chairman, Dr. Sarah, Dr. Saket, Dr. Arvind, Dr. Manisha. They have been using this drug for the last, I think, many years, I will call it, and they will be able to tell their experience. We have not yet much experience of using this drug, but the recommendation is because it decreases cardiovascular mortality, then we should prefer this drug over the other drugs. Now about the blood pressure. What should be the target blood pressure in a patient of diabetes kidney disease? KDIGO recommendation 20 is that diabetes without albuminuria, less than 30 milligrams in 24 hours. It should be less than 140 by 90. And the diabetes with albuminuria, more than 30 milligrams, it should be 130 by 80. And never less than 120 millimeters of mercury. And diastolic less than 60 because then it increase acute coronary insufficiency. Now, what drugs should be used to control blood pressure? It has been found two very landmark trials again, IDNT and RENAL trial, the results of which came in about 20 years back. And they have clearly shown that if the same degree of blood pressure is controlled with the ARBS inhibitors and other drugs, ARBS inhibitors decreases albuminuria to the tune of around 35%. And they also decrease the rate of fall of GFR by around 20%. And 20% decrease in GFR, still a lot of residual risk function remains. And as this has to be covered by giving SGLT2 inhibitors and maybe later on by finerenone and GLP-1 receptor agonist. In decreased salt intake of less than 5 grams salt per day should be taken when the patient is given ARBS inhibitors to get the useful effect of ARBS inhibitors. But it is an underutilized drug. Only 25% of the patients who can benefit from it actually receive it due to various reasons. And the reasons are, we are scared that the patient will get AKI, patient will fall in GFR, hyperkalemia, or cough. I think we should give a fair trial before we say quits, because this is a very useful drug. It decreases rate of fall of GFR by around 20%, decreases end-stage kidney disease. If the rate of fall of GFR is a 5 ml, it will come down to 4 ml, increase the life of kidney by 2 years, and then you add the 40% by SGLT2, get additional factor 20%. Give a fair trial to this drug before we say that we cannot use this drug. Now we have to use ACE inhibitors and ARBs. A patient has got diabetes has got hypertension, has albumin creatinine ratio more than 300 milligram per day, this is the highest tolerated approved dose to be given. And the recommendation is 1B by KDIGO. If the patient has got diabetes with urine albumin creatinine ratio more than 30 milligram per gram, it is normotensive, the ARBS inhibitors should be considered. Diabetes, hypertension, and urine albumin creatinine ratio is less than 30 milligram. In that case, BP can be controlled with any antihypertensive drugs. We don't have to prefer ARBS inhibitors over other drugs. And if the patient has got diabetes, is normotensive, and urine albumin creatinine ratio less than 30 milligram, there is no role of ARBS inhibitors, no role in primary prevention of chronic kidney disease. This is the latest data which is coming. No role for primary prevention. Controlling BP decreases progression of chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular morbidity, and mortality. So till now, we had diabetes and the diabetic kidney disease with albuminuria. ARBS inhibitors, they are beneficial. If the albuminuria is not there, then it may not work. Till now, we had a drug which works only when there is albuminuria. Now we come to SGLT2 inhibitors. As I already told you, it confers significant renal and cardiovascular protective effects. Now we know that in a patient of diabetes, there is RAS is stimulated, and that causes the constriction of efferent arterioles. And there is dilatation of the efferent arterioles to tubular-glomerular feed, where more sugar is filtered, more sodium is absorbed, and that causes the dilatation of the efferent arterioles, and the intraglomeralar pressure increases, more hyperfiltration occurs, more albuminuria occurs. Now, if you give ARBS inhibitors to these patients, that causes the dilatation of the efferent arterioles, and dilatation of efferent arterioles decreases the intraglomerular pressure. That decreases intraglomerular, you can see the dilatation occurs, and that causes decrease in the intraglomerular pressure. The rate of the GFR can fall. If the GFR fall can occur up to 30%. If the GFR falls up to 30%, we don't withdraw the drug. We go on giving this drug. But if the fall is more than 30%, then we have to withdraw this drug. So this occurs, and this is in the patients where the GFR falls occurs. These are the patients who are going to benefit by giving ARBS inhibitors. Now, SGLT2 inhibitors, what does it does? SGLT2 inhibits the absorption of glucose from the proximal tubules. With a result, less sodium is absorbed, more sodium goes to the macula densa, and that causes the tubular-glomerular feedback and constriction of efferent arterioles. The efferent arterioles are constricted, you can see it over here, and the efferent arterioles are dilated, and there is decrease in the intraglomerular pressure, the hyperfiltration goes away. But there is a disadvantage of this. Disadvantage is it decreases GFR. And we can, this is what, same thing which we experienced with ARBS inhibitors, they can occur with SGLT2 inhibitors also. So whenever we give SGLT2 inhibitors, 50% patients, we experience a fall in GFR by around 10%. We need not to worry. We need not to stop the drug. Continue with the drug. Over a period of time, automatically this will go away. This is a hemodynamic effect. You can just see it over here. This is EMPA-REG and CADENCE trial. It started from here. Patient was started on SGLT2 inhibitors, the GFR fell. And then it picks up. And then the rate of fall, you can see it was like this. If you don't give it, it falls like this. But if you give it, it remains over here. So we have to give this drug. Now the question arises, like the patient has to take ARBS inhibitors as well as SGLT2 inhibitors, how to start these drugs. Now, if the patient has got a GFR of say 60 ml per minute, I will say start with ARBS inhibitors, wait for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or maybe 1 month time, and see the GFR is stabilized. And maximum tolerated dose of ARBS inhibitors has been started, and then you start with SGLT2 inhibitors. Avoid starting both the drugs simultaneously, because then the GFR fall can be more. So better is that you start one drug, wait for 1 month time, and see to it that the GFR is stabilized, and then you add SGLT2 inhibitors, and always tell the patient beforehand that the creatinine will rise, nothing to worry, but that will be useful for the patient. Now, what is the mechanism of action? It decreases hyperfiltration, glycemic control, natriuresis, decreases volume, controls blood pressure, decreases weight, decreases albuminuria, altered cardiac fuel metabolism through ketosis, and improvement in cardiovascular and kidney oxygenation, reduces inflammation and oxidative stress, lowered uric acid levels, and reduced sympathetic nervous system activity, improves vascular functions, the restoration of normal autophagy. So many functions are there. We have got various trials. I will not be going to detail. We have got kidney trials, KIDNES trial, DAPA-CKD trial, and EMPA kidney trial. Then we have cardiovascular outcome trial, EMPA trial, CANVAS trial, and DAPA trial. Meta-analysis of all these trials says that it decreased hospitalization due to heart failure by around 40%. This is of all the trials, the results are same. It decreases 3 MACE. 3 MACE is non-fatal myocardial infarction, non-fatal strokes, and cardiovascular mortality by 18%. So it is driven mainly by cardiovascular mortality. Decreases cardiovascular mortality by 18%. Renal end-stage kidney disease, renal death, and worsening kidney function by 33%. Decreases albuminuria by around 35%, a rate of fall of GFR by around 35%. I would like to tell you certain facts about SGLT2 inhibitors. The efficacy of SGLT2 inhibitors remains the same, whatever may be the GFR. Like the GFR is say 40 ml per minute, and other patient has got a GFR of around 80 ml per minute. The rate of fall of GFR is decreased at the same level at all the level of GFR. This is important. The efficacy of drug is same, whatever may be the degree of albuminuria. This is very, very important. It is not that when the albuminuria is more, then the efficacy will be more, or the albuminuria is less, the efficacy will be more. It remains the same. KDOGI recommends that we can start only when the GFR is more than 30 ml, and now with DAPA-CKD more than 25 ml of GFR. But the efficacy of the drug continues when the patient goes up to dialysis. So we have to go on giving this drug. And, and another very important thing is that only 10 milligram dose of glucosine, 10 milligram dose of empagliflozin, and 100 milligram dose of canagliflozin is enough to get this hemodynamic effects. Higher dose can be used to control blood sugars, but for getting the organ protecting effect, smaller dose is enough. This is the KIDNES trial. You can just see the number of participants. The events were very less. KIDNES trial was when the GFR was more than 30 ml and albuminuria was more than 300 milligrams. The DAPA-CKD trial was there when it is more than 25 ml GFR and albuminuria is more than 200 milligrams. And 1/3 patients, they were non-diabetic. So what they found in this study, a very important study, that not only the effects comes in diabetics, but non-diabetics also. Non-diabetics also have organ protection if you give this drug to chronic kidney disease patients. We have started using this drug in non-diabetics also with excellent results. EMPA kidney is the latest trial. This is an ongoing trial. The results are likely to come in around next year. And here they have gone up to 20 ml of GFR. They have gone up to 100 milligram of albuminuria. And they have taken all those patients where they had not been used in KIDNES and DAPA-CKD, like kidney transplant patients, immunosuppressed patients, the patients are cystic disease patients. They were not being given drugs earlier, and now they have tried to use these drugs in these situations also. Now, side effects of SGLT2 inhibitors. We have used these drugs, all of us have been using these drugs, and we face these complications, but not very important, not very severe kind of problem. The male genital mycotic infections and female genital mycotic infections, they are common. Maybe if I used in about 100 patients, 2 to 3 patients, they come back with these infections. Always instruct the patients that whenever they take daily bath and clean the genital parts properly and take proper precautions, and hygiene has to be kept. And in females, keep the part as dry as possible. Urinary tract infections is not big a problem, particularly avoid using these drugs patient who has got recurrent urinary tract infections, like females are there, or males, old age females or males, there's a recurrent urinary tract infections that are occurring, avoid using these drugs. Volume depletion, patient who's got the cardiac failure, ejection fraction is less, he's using diuretics. Of course, by giving SGLT2 inhibitors, blood pressure can further fall, the volume can decrease. Better is about a week or 10 days back, first you decrease the dose of diuretic and then instruct the patients. When you start the patient, the volume can decrease, giddiness can come in, and then you adjust the volume. If you do this, practically it doesn't become much of a problem. Diabetic ketoacidosis, yes, this is a problem. I remember seeing 2-3 patients. Dr. Sarah got two or three patients admitted. I've seen 2-3 patients. This can occur. But if you take certain precautions, then this can be avoided. That precautions are, it should be avoided in a patient who is a sick patient. Like he's got fever, he's got gastroenteritis, he's undergoing surgery, he is fasting, and you are not giving insulin to the patient. So if you are not giving insulin to the patient, don't give SGLT2 inhibitors also, because that masks, that sugar becomes normal, ketones remains, it becomes euglycemic ketoacidosis. So in a sick patient, when you avoid giving insulin, avoid giving SGLT2 inhibitors also, you can avoid diabetes, the euglycemic ketoacidosis. This is very, very important. And the type 1 diabetics, this is approved in Japan and some countries in Europe, but generally this is in America and other countries. It's not yet approved in type 1 diabetics, where the chances of getting euglycemic ketoacidosis are more. Fractures and lower extremity amputations, they were found in CANVAS trial and not found in CREDENCE trial. But basically, if you avoid using these drugs in patients who have vascular disease, this is the diabetic foot, multiple ulcers, avoid using these drugs over there. This is also one of the contraindications we use here. Now, contraindications for avoid using the drugs, starting with a GFR less than 25 ml per minute, patients on dialysis, kidney transplant or patient on immunosuppressive drugs, cystic disease of kidneys, recurrent urinary tract infections, peripheral vascular disease, and type 1 diabetic patients. We know there is RS stimulation in a patient with diabetes, and with the aldosterone increases. Aldosterone causes sodium and water retention and causes hypertension, volume retention, and that causes cardiac failure. It also causes pro-fibrotic and pro-inflammatory, with the result more of kidney disease and the cardiac disease is there. That is why we were using spironolactone in these patients. Aldosterone escape phenomena. That is, the patient is on ARBs inhibitors for about 6 months. We used to add spironolactone, and with very good results. They decrease albuminuria by around 30%, decrease the rate of fall of GFR by around 30%, decreases cardiac failure, and other benefits are there. The problem with spironolactone is when the GFR is less than 40 ml per minute, particularly 30 ml per minute, chances of hyperkalemia are very high. We are already giving ARBs inhibitors. So for that, the Finerenone has come in. Finerenone is a novel non-steroidal and is 500-fold more selective to mineralocorticoid receptors, 3-fold to 10-fold more potent and higher efficacy is there, and chances of hyperkalemia are much less as compared to the spironolactone. It has been found. It also decreases 18% relative risk reduction in the fall of GFR less than 40 ml per minute, and 14% relative risk reduction in MACE hospitalization due to heart failure. This is a FINLO-DKD study which has come in about November 2020 and with excellent results. This is the Finerenone study. FIAGRO study, the cardiovascular outcome part of this Finerenone is still on, and the results are likely to come in December 21 to get and then this drug is likely to be approved by FDA to be used, and this drug can become fifth pillar. They have used ARBs inhibitors, combined it with the SGLT2 inhibitors, and then Finerenone in 5% of patients. Till now, we don't know whether Finerenone combined with SGLT2 inhibitors, combined with ARBs inhibitors, how much benefit will come in. More trials are required to come to a conclusion that adding Finerenone to SGLT2 inhibitors and ARBs inhibitors will be much more beneficial. GLP-1 receptor agonist, it is an incretin mimetics which increases insulin and decreases glucagon levels, controls blood sugars, reduce the risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and may lower risk of albuminuria progression and eGFR decline. It slows gastric emptying and decreases appetite and causes weight loss. It can be used up to GFR of 15 ml per minute, but not patients on dialysis. So as compared to decreases weight, controls BP by causing natriuresis, it has low risk of hypoglycemia, decreases the risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, particularly when the GFR is less than 60 ml per minute, not preferred in patients with cardiac failure because it does not reduce the risk of hospitalization. So as compared to SGLT2 inhibitors, this is a anti-hyperglycemic drug at lower GFR. Number one, it can be used up to 15 ml of GFR when the patient is not on dialysis. For decreasing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, this is a better drug. But this is not a preferred drug when the patient has got heart failure. Then SGLT2 inhibitors, they are preferred drugs. So there's very important trials which taken place. Leader trial with liraglutide, Sustain S trial with the semaglutide, and Rewind trial with dulaglutide. And overall 7 trials, this was comparing dulaglutide and insulin glargine. They have found that the insulin control as compared to insulin glargine is very good, and low risk of hypoglycemia is there, and in the rate of fall of GFR was also 10% as compared to you don't give it. But this is a short-term trial, that was a secondary effect. The ongoing kidney trial of GLP-1 receptor agonist is ongoing, and the results are likely to be coming in 2024. There is a FLOW trial. The meta-analysis of cardiovascular outcome trial is it decreases cardiovascular deaths by around 12%, strokes by around 16%, myocardial infarction by around 9%, and all-cause mortality by 12%. Anything with decreased mortality, decreased cardiovascular disease is a welcome step. So because there is huge cardiovascular mortality occurring in diabetic patients, that is why this drug is preferred drug. And development of severely increased albuminuria, ESKD, and renal death by 17% is mainly driven by severely decreases albuminuria. Now this is a FLOW trial, this ongoing trial. We are waiting for this trial. The results are likely to come in 2024. Then after this trial, maybe this has got the potential to be added as 6th pillar for patients with diabetic kidney disease. So where to use GLP-1 receptor agonists? CVD patients who have not achieved individualized glycemic targets despite using of metformin or SGLT2 inhibitors, or those unable to use these medications. For glycemic control in patients with GFR less than 25 ml per minute but not on dialysis, patients beyond 60 years of age with cardiovascular disease, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or 2 cardiovascular risk factors who already have CKD. So it should not be combined with DPP-4 inhibitors, or to be avoided in pancreatitis, pancreatic cancers, medullary carcinoma thyroid, and patients on dialysis. To summarize, we have been controlling blood sugars by controlling the diabetic kidney disease by controlling blood sugars, blood pressure, and ARBS inhibitors. Now the recommendation is we should always add SGLT2 inhibitors when the GFR is more than 25 ml per minute. That is for organ protection. And now, if the Finerenone tomorrow comes in, that might become another drug, another tool in our bag to control the decrease the cardiovascular disease and progression of kidney disease. And GLP-1 receptor agonist is a very important anti-hyperglycemic drug that can decrease atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Awareness of chronic kidney disease is to be increased so that this knowledge, what I'm talking, should go to even to the patients. The patient should know a newer drug is coming that will decrease their organ protection, and that drug is to be taken to decrease, to protect the organs. Not only we have to control blood sugars, we have to protect organs to decrease morbidity and mortality in diabetic patients. So that and frequent urine albumin creatinine ratios, eGFR measurements is done for early diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of diabetes and reduce morbidity and mortality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh, for an excellent overview of the management of diabetic kidney disease and telling us what are the newer insights and what are the newer pillars of the management of diabetic kidney disease. That was an excellent talk, and you covered most of the latest aspects. And I invite my co-panelists for their comments. And also, I request all the audience to kindly type their questions in the inboxes so that you can have the benefit of vast experience of Dr. Rajesh Agarwal and translate it into your clinical practice. So most of us, there are certain few questions coming up. We'll be taking them one by one. I invite my co-panelists, Dr. Arvind and Dr. Manisha, for their comments. And Dr. Saket Kant has joined. He's a busy man. He is joined. And welcome, Dr. Kant. Dr. Arvind, unmute yourself.
I think it's a very nice talk given by Dr. Rajesh Agarwal, covering every aspect of treating diabetic kidney disease and what are the new medications and how to achieve it. The point comes to our mind as a physician when a person comes to you for diabetes. Already data shows that patients are having kidney disease. So how to detect at the first instance that the patient is having kidney disease for the physician? So that is my first question.
And the thing is, we should get two things. One is urine albumin by creatinine ratio, and second is creatinine levels. And from creatinine, you calculate by the app what is the GFR of the patient, and then that becomes, if the GFR is less than 60 ml per minute, or if the GFR, even if it is more than 60 ml, but urine albumin creatinine ratio is more than 30. This is what is diabetic kidney disease. These two things should be more frequently measured: urine albumin creatinine ratio and your serum creatinine. This should be done annually. This should be measured.
Dr. Rajesh, can I ask a question? How do what is the mechanism of GLP-1 receptor agonist and the benefit of CKD? How do they act? Because mostly what our understanding is that they prevent atherosclerosis and give rise to benefits as far as cardiovascular death is concerned. But how do they act in kidney disease?
Actually, one thing, you're very right. It decreases weight, controls blood sugar, controls blood pressure. So cardiometabolic benefits are there. In kidney, actually, there are GLP-1 receptors present in the endothelium and the mesangial cells and the macrophages as well as tubular epithelial cells. They decrease the mesangial expansion. They decrease the basal membrane thickening. They decrease albuminuria and they protect the podocytes and the endothelium. This is ongoing process and ongoing research is going on. The exact answers are not known, but people are working on these lines.
Good, excellent. Dr. Saket Kant for his comments, Dr. Manisha for her comments.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk, sir. It was really enlightening. And what I have learned and what I think the take-home very important message, the earlier, all the trials which were done on SGLT2, initially when they were done, we were always looking at the cardiovascular outcome. And when we found that, yes, it is affecting the kidney outcome as well, so it was started doing on diabetics as well as non-diabetics. So today the carry-home message is, the take-home message is that we must realize that SGLT2 is not only climbed in the hierarchy of glycemic control, but also those who are non-diabetics, SGLT2 are going to prevent the progression of kidney disease, and this is kind of a magic wand which has come after ACE and ARBs. So this is a very, very important message which I think after this talk we all must carry. And even if the standard teaching is that less than 45 ml GFR, don't use SGLT2. No, but then even if GFR is less, it may not control the diabetes, but it is going to control the kidney. So the organ protection effect of this SGLT2 is a very, very important thing which we all must keep in mind. And I think this is a very important message which you have passed on. And the second thing about the non-steroidal mineralocorticoid, the newer Finrenon you talked about, that is also wonderful. We are waiting for the results to come. And if it shows, then again it is going to be a newer drug and new thing in the management of CKD again, which is going to show the reduction in albuminuria. So now, by God's grace and by everyone's efforts of, scientists, after ACE inhibitors and ARBs, now we have SGLT2s, now we have these drugs, which, initially the label of CKD means we have given off. We are just waiting for them to progress to end stage. Now we have wonderful drugs. So these are really good. And thank you for enlightening on all these.
Thank you. And that's very right, you see. For the first time in the history of chronic kidney disease, KDIGO has given 1A recommendation. And ARBS inhibitors was 1B recommendation. 1A means that if you give this drug, the results will be as has been told to you. It is that because all the 5 trials, they had the same results. They decrease the cardiovascular disease. They decrease the progression of kidney disease. So all the trials have the same results. ARBS inhibitors is 1B, is not 1A. This is 1A recommendation for the first time in the history. And this is like I was talking to Sarah today. Sarah said, where do you don't use this drug? Only when the contraindication is there. That's right. And the contraindication right now is when the GFR is less than 25 ml or the immunosuppressive patient is there, recurrent urinary tract infections are there. And now with EMPA kidney trial, they are going up to 20 ml of GFR. They are going up to GFR less than 100 ml. They are even using these drugs in immunosuppressed patients also. The results is likely to come next year, and then the contraindication is also decreased. This is a wonder drug. Definitely, this is a wonder drug.
With the decrease in cost, it is so vastly available. That is a very important factor.
10 rupees is the cost. 10 rupees one tablet, very less cost. And I think this drug should be used. Of course, take all precautions before using this drug. And the message should go to all the physicians that they should use this drug.
Hello. In point which you very rightly said that, including me, the ACE inhibitors and ARBs are very used in very restrictive manner. Once we see CKD, our hand is not very comfortable writing ACE inhibitor and ARB, which we should encourage our own self if it is,
I'm sorry to interrupt. There are many questions coming, and Dr. Khanna is also trying to ask questions. And Dr. Saket has joined a bit late, and may I request him to kindly answer certain questions. One of the questions is off the topic about concentrated insulins. We'll take it later on. But another question by Dr. Mahesh Grover to Dr. Rajesh is that SGLT2 inhibitors increase the chances of repeated UTI, which in turn increases creatinine. Please comment on that.
Yes, there is a risk of urinary tract infection, theoretical risk of increased urinary tract infections. So in patients who are already getting recurrent urinary tract infections, like old age females are there, old age males are there, or the kidney stones are there, one should not use this drug. But otherwise, you see, if a patient has got one UTI in 1 year, then you can always give it and take precautions. We have been using this drug, I think, from the last 1 year, and UTI is not a big problem. Of course, the 2 or 3 patients I remember where the genital infections occurred, and we have to stop this drug for a few days. And then we'll again started it after using, and this is important, you see, genital infection generally respond to local antifungal infection, the ointments. Generally, if you stop the drug and give local antifungal drugs, that generally works. No need to give systemic antifungal drugs to these patients.
3H, I'll say 3H. First H is hygiene. Maintain the hygiene. Use keep the local area dry with use of paper napkins, which are available everywhere. Second is don't hold urine. Hold. Second H. Third H would be hydration. So if you take care of these 3H, then the chances of these infections go down a lot. Now, Dr. Saket is there, and I would ask him to answer this question. Dr. Bhagra says uncontrolled diabetes damages kidneys. Everyone, including the doctors and patients, know this aspect. But according to his clinical experience, 50% of diabetics also have pulmonary or extrapulmonary COX. Do we also do routine testing for COX in such patients?
I guess you will be a better person to answer this question, sir.
Dr. Rajesh, would you like to take that question?
Actually, you see, tuberculosis is very common in India MCC. And of course, we should always, if you suspect, you always investigate the patient for tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, quite often we see tuberculosis, but not that every patient gets tuberculosis. We should always investigate and see if there is any symptoms or signs of tuberculosis. Always see.
Another question is regarding euglycemic ketoacidosis as complication of SGLT2 inhibitors. So there are two eminent persons to answer that, Dr. Rajesh Agarwal and Dr. Saket Kant, to answer because we have all treated such patients. So Rajesh Agarwal first.
Actually, you see, this is a very important question. And we see patients of euglycemic ketoacidosis. It's not that we don't see it. But if we take certain precautions, like if the patient is sick, he has got fever, he has got gastroenteritis, he has got pneumonitis, he has to undergo surgery, he is fasting, and we are stopping insulin. If you are stopping insulin, you should also stop SGLT2 inhibitors. The problem is if you stop insulin and go on giving SGLT2 inhibitors, we will cause euglycemic ketoacidosis. So always, and the rate, the suspicion of is that it is there is always should be very high, because these patients, they check blood sugars at home, they're not feeling well, and they see that the blood sugar is normal, so they will not come to you, but they go on deteriorating. They will become unconscious and then they will come to you, right? So that is because the blood ketone sticks are not there in India. We don't use routinely, but in Western countries they use ketone sticks at over there at homes also, type 1 diabetes, particularly patients. But here the answer is to prevent this. And if the patient develops euglycemic ketoacidosis, they are to be treated in the same way like when you're treating diabetic ketoacidosis, blood sugar has normalized, then we start giving insulin and dextrose to the patients. This is the way we have to treat. We have to give insulin to the patient, so the glucagon levels they go down, the ketones go down, give dextrose to these patients. Generally, you will do this. Remember, I think, Sarah, we saw 2 or 3 patients with you of euglycemic ketoacidosis, their patients. And at that time, we didn't have much of knowledge of all this, and we just treated that. But now I think we are better equipped to handle all this. By day, we'll become better equipped and better knowledgeable to handle all these things.
Dr. Saket, would you like to add on certain things?
I guess central to euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis is a state of relative or absolute insulin deficiency. That is very, very important. So you have to be very careful about your diagnosis when you're starting a patient on SGLT2 inhibitors. Many times I have seen patients with latent autoimmune diabetes of adult being started on SGLT2 inhibitors in thinking that they are type 2 diabetes. That is not to be done, because what happens basically is the insulin to glucagon ratio is very, very important in the pathogenesis of diabetic ketoacidosis. When the insulin glucagon ratio goes down, you will have diabetic ketoacidosis. And if you have SGLT2 on board, you will have euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis because of the glycosuria. So first is misdiagnosis. If you start a patient of relative or absolute insulin deficiency on SGLT2 inhibitors, you risk having euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis. The second thing is a patient who's come to you losing weight at diagnosis with an A1C of around 10. I refrain from starting a SGLT2 inhibitor to that patient because the patient is already losing weight. That basically means the patient is in catabolism. Although the data, if you look at data from SGLT2 inhibitors, higher the A1C, higher is the benefit with SGLT2 inhibitors. But all of us, including everyone from the Department of Medicine, would agree that we would refrain from starting a patient on an SGLT2 when the patient is losing weight at diagnosis. It may be just because of glucotoxicity, glycosuria, but we'll refrain from starting because that is a risk factor for euglycemic decay. Now, there has been a trial with SGLT2 inhibitors in type 1 diabetes, that is the DEFECT-1 trial, and it basically showed that euglycemic decay is not error on the part of the physician, it is error on part of the patient. What the patient tries to do is when the patient is taking insulin, has good glycemic control, the patient develops what is called double diabetes because insulin is anabolic. The patient starts gaining weight. We add an SGLT2 to that patient because of double diabetes, type 1 diabetes plus type 2 diabetes. When the glucose values go down, instead of stopping or decreasing those SGLT2, the patient himself or herself would be decreasing the insulin doses. So what will happen is you'll have relative insulin deficiency at that time, and that would risk the patient going into diabetic ketoacidosis.
Good. Another question by Dr. Jory is regarding the EGFR 15 and use of dulaglutide. Any practical experience regarding in patients of CKD with EGFR of 15? I have used GLP-1 dulaglutide a lot, but not in patients who have a EGFR of 15. Dr. Rajesh or any
Yes.
other panelist who have, please comment on that.
Actually, the Award 7 trial, this is what the Award 7 trial is. From 45 ml to when the patient goes to die. Still the time, even if the GFR is 10 ml, they have continued using dulaglutide. And they compared that with insulin glargine. And what they found was the blood sugar control was very good and better than the insulin glargine, and the risk of hypoglycemia is 50%. So that is why we can use this drug even if when the GFR is almost 15 ml per minute or even lesser than that till the patient goes to dialysis. And it is prevents the cardiovascular morbidity and mortality.
He's talking about the tolerability and what dosage to be used, 1.5 or 0.75. I think Dr. Saket Kant would be better person to answer.
I guess it is a very lucrative option, a GLP-1 receptor agonist in patients with CKD, because we know that most patients with CKD would have cardiovascular disease as compared to CKD. We've got very good interventions on part of CKD. So a drug that can decrease ASCVD is a very, very lucrative option. In fact, GLP-1 receptor agonists are one of those drugs that can decrease ASCVD. But the problem is tolerability. Yes, it is a problem because these patients have uremic gastritis. The patient may not be eating well. The patient, when we start on a higher dose of dulaglutide or liraglutide, would have nausea, would have loss of appetite that the patient already has because of uremic gastritis and because of the uremic state. So we usually start on, we would be happy to start on a lower dose, probably escalate it later on. And if the patient does not tolerate because of uremic gastritis or nausea, vomiting because of other factors in CKD, we may have to withdraw. But it is a very lucrative option. I have given to my patients whose EGFR have dropped to around 20 or 15 also, who are tolerating, they do very well as regards ASCVD is concerned because of the long-term benefit that these drugs have to offer. But initiating would be a problem when you have a patient who's got an EGFR of 15 to 20. The patient may not tolerate it that well.
Yes, another question of the subject is regarding concentrated insulins. I would like to take that in the last. And another question from Dr. Mahesh Grover to everyone is, should we use SGLT2 inhibitor in insulinopenic patient to refuse to take insulin? I think Dr. Rajesh and Dr. Saket has already answered that for the risk of euglycemic ketoacidosis. And now I take the opportunity to ask that about concentrated insulins to Dr. Arvind, Dr. Manisha, and Dr. Saket Kant. What are concentrated insulins and what is the management and status in management of type 2 diabetes? Is Toujeo and Lantus the same? Humalog 200, does it change the hemodynamics for PK/PD, and would it affect anything in CKD patients? Rajesh, regarding your CKD.
Toujeo is a basal insulin, which is safe in CKD patients. Humalog, then we have to give it 3 times a day. We have to see according to the insulin requirement of a patient, how much insulin is requiring. Most of the CKD patients, they are tolerated on the basal shot of one insulin, maybe Toujeo is good enough. And then the SGLT2 or maybe a GLP-1 analog is good enough for that. If we want to give 3 times, then Humalog 200 will be a reduced dose in a small volume that will be benefited. As such, there is no contraindication. Any contraindication, Dr. Saket? In CKD?
I guess as CKD progresses, the requirement of insulin also goes down because the enzyme insulinase that destroys the insulin basically gets more active. So there is a reduction in the insulin doses, and there is the glycemic control improves. Sometimes we have to withdraw all the drugs, and the patient may be very, very stable on linagliptin or a combination of glinides like lipaglinide itself. So I don't see any advantage of giving U100 between U100 U300. I don't see an advantage because it is just the volume of injection that is decreased. The U300 may have some advantage because it is flatter as compared to U100. So if patient has nocturnal hypoglycemia, that may be one concern that can be mitigated by U300. I have had one patient, 75-year-old male, only on basal insulin, recurrent episodes of hypoglycemia. He was on DPP-4 and SGLT2 plus basal insulin. He was not tolerating metformin, and he used to have recurrent hypoglycemia on U100 Glargine. Shifted to U300, the hypoglycemias are gone. He's very happy. I don't see an advantage of Humalog U200 in patients with CKD, because that is the advantage that we only have is reduction in volume. So patients who are taking very high doses of insulin probably would be benefiting more from U200 as compared to U100. I guess we'll take opinion from Dr. Manisha also.
I would only like to add here that when we are using concentrated insulins, we must educate the patients, because if there is any error, so the risk of hypoglycemia would be much more. So here, if we are using, anyways, as you rightly said that, in kidney diseases, the requirement anyways goes down. But even if the requirements are high and they have been prescribed, so patient education would be very, very important here.
What he wanted to know was the PKPD. The PKPD does not change. So as Dr. Saket said, that if you have any nocturnal hypoglycemia, switching to 2GO from Lantus would be a choice, but the PKPD does not change. It is only the volume which changes. And abroad, there are big people who have a very high body weight. So that is why if your insulin requirement is very high, and that was the concept of concentrated insulin. So I think Dr. Saket has already answered very nicely regarding that question.
I can just tell you about my own experience. We have about 200 patients of end-stage diabetic patients on dialysis with me. And generally, either they are not requiring any anti-diabetic drugs, or they are just controlled with one tablet of linagliptin, or they are taking linagliptin with some amount of Lantus insulin, and that's all. Very rarely we find that the blood sugar is very high, or do we require more drugs to control this. Generally, this is enough to control blood sugars in our patients.
If any audience has any question, please ask.
I have two concerns with the KDIGO guidelines, Dr. Rajesh. First was that what they said was HbA1c is a very good marker for glycemic control in patients with CKD. I would not tend to agree with that, because HbA1c changes with a lot of things. A lot of factors can change HbA1c. In fact, a patient who's got iron deficiency anemia in CKD, the HbA1c would be falsely elevated. And when you give erythropoietin to such patients, when the RBC turnover increases, your HbA1c may be falsely low. So I would not agree with the KDIGO guidelines on that front, that HbA1c is a very good marker for glycemic control. The second concern I had was the guidelines suggest that anyone having a EGFR of more than 30 with CKD should be given SGLT2 inhibitor. I guess that takes away the individualized approach that we have for our patients. Some patients who are very lean, who have cachexia because of any reason, or basically because of CKD also, probably we would refrain from giving a SGLT2 to those patients. Obese patient, I'll be happy. Overweight patient, I'll be happy. But a blanket statement that anyone with an EGFR of more than 30 with CKD should be given an SGLT2. I don't know how far all of us would agree with that. Or your comments on that?
Okay, KDIGO, they have longer things. You might be read lesser in HbA1c. I've read the whole guidelines. HbA1c, they say, if it is less than 30 ml per minute. Of course, there are more underestimation because of the reasons that you're told. The lifespan is less, and we need supporting to the patient, and other reasons. And sometimes overestimation because of carbonated hemoglobin and because of metabolic acidosis. But taking everything into consideration, they said that if the HbA1c is not concurrent with the sugars that we are measuring, then you should measure continuous glucose monitoring. You can estimate the HbA1c from there, and then you see HbA1c as compared to the estimated HbA1c. This is what they said. And secondly, they have said that if it is, they have compared that with glycated albumin and fritoxamine, and they have found there is also problems over there as well, because the albumin levels, they go down, proteinuria is there, and the half-life also decreases. And they have ultimately they have come out with the answer that till date, the HbA1c is the gold standard. Why? Because the method is more standardized, it is cost effective and prognostically related. That is why. But even if that you find that is not concurrent, you can always change it. And secondly, your question about the lean patients giving SGLT2 inhibitors. The problem is less than 45 ml of GFR, anti-hyperglycemic effect is not there. We are not giving it to control blood sugars. We are giving it for organ protection. So that doesn't make any difference. We are giving it in non-diabetics also. We are not giving to control blood sugars. It's not going to decrease insulin over here. So that is why that question does not arise. And another very important thing is they have not taken that they have said GFR should be up to 30 ml per minute. They are not talking about albuminuria, right? The other trials are talking about albuminuria. They have not talked about albuminuria. They say albuminuria, even if it is not there, you use this drug because that will decrease the progression because the cardiovascular outcome trials were all, they had A1. Well, initially, CANVAS trial, EMPA-RG trial, when they were done at a time when all the patients, they had GFR of more than 90 ml. They were A1. And then the benefits, the renal benefit, cardiovascular benefits are there. That is why they have come out that even if the albuminuria is not there, you use this drug. And for organ protection, the GFR is more than 30 ml, you use this drug. That is it.
Going into the future, do you think the AGFR cutoffs for SGLT2 inhibitors will just go away? You may not have the glycemic benefit, but you will still have the pleiotropic benefit.
Yes. Maybe I think tomorrow you might use in dialysis patients also, because that's what we are talking about. They're not related to glycemia at all. That might be, now 20 ml is the EMPA-KD. EMPA-CKD study is up to 20 ml of GFR and albuminuria is 100 milligrams. And tomorrow they might say that we can use in dialysis also. So things that day by day, they might go on changing.
Dr. Saki, you are having competition for the cardiologist and the nephrologist. They are using your Forxiga and various medicine, heart failure, and using in CKD patients. So you will have tough competition.
Less than 45 EGFR, the ball is in the court of the nephrologist.
In DAPA CKD,
nowadays, like Sarah today I was talking to Sarah said, we give it when there is no contraindication. That is it, you see. We sit in the OPD daily, we search patients where you cannot give it. Otherwise, we give this drug, whether diabetic or non-diabetic. Because generally, you see, till now, what was happening? Patients were coming to us, you write the treatment, okay, sir, kidney ke liye kaun si dawai likhi hai? And then the people were writing ketostival or leprosave. They were writing, now this drug has come in, you can write this drug. Because this is a drug which works. All users does the written ketostival, leprosave. They were being written. Now we have come to a drug which is generally works. It works.
Yes. With evidence.
With evidence.
So if there are no further questions, I will. Another question from Dr. Grover. Can we give half the dose of SGLT2 in patients with CKD, normal or less weight? Dr. Rajesh.
Actually, I told you just 10 milligram of dapagliflozin, 10 milligram of empagliflozin, and 100 milligram of canagliflozin at whatever may be the GFR, say up to 20-25 ml we use it. That is enough to get the hemodynamic effect. For getting anti-hyperglycemic effect, when the GFR is more than 60 ml per minute, then the anti-hyperglycemic effect of HbA1c decrease of 0.7 is there. And if then you can use higher dose, 300 milligram of canagliflozin, 25 milligram of empagliflozin, that can be used for anti-hyperglycemic effect. But for getting hemodynamic effect, for organ protecting effect, smaller dose is enough. Like 10 milligram and 10 milligram empagliflozin is enough to get the hemodynamic effect.
If there are no more questions, I hand over the mic to Dr. Khushbu for further deliberations or the program.
Thank you, Sarah sir. Thank you, Rajesh Agarwal sir, for this illuminating talk. You have imparted to us a great amount of knowledge. I am sure all of us will be able to implement it in our daily practice. I'd like to thank our chairpersons, Arvind Agarwal sir, Manisha ma'am, Sarah sir, and Saket sir for chairing this session and for conducting a very engaging session of question and answers. I'd like to thank everyone else for your precious time. And with that, I think we'll close this session and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rajesh, for nice discussion.
Thank you, Khanna.
Thank you, Rajesh, for nice discussion. A very excellent talk.
Thank you, Khanna.
We enjoyed it a lot.
I'm very happy to hear your voice. Thank you, Khanna.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajesh.
Thank you, Arnida. Thank you, Arnida. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, everybody, and have a nice weekend. And thank you for Dr. Rajesh.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.